Okay, climate change. This is probably the biggest, and it's the last one I'm going to talk about, and probably the worst. And I have a few different aspects that I will talk about. First one is coral bleaching. Now, that you may have read about. A normal coral looks like this. The coral animal, shown here, has little dots here. These little dots represent tiny algae that live inside it and photosynthesize and provide the coral with most of its nutrition. The coral also has these little tentacles, which enables it to eat. So it has two sources of food. One is catching it in its tentacles, little stuff, and the other is the algae inside that photosynthesize. When water gets too hot, this is what the coral looked like. Off go the algae, they're gone, and the coral now looks like this. It looks just like a coral skeleton, and that's what bleaching is. Is this coral automatically dead? No, it's not automatically dead. It still can catch some food with its tentacles. But different species have different abilities to do that, and most species of coral can't survive on what they can catch only. They need the input of the photosynthesis from their algae. The algae are gone. If the water gets back to a normal temperature within a reasonable amount of time, the bleached coral can go back to living coral, the algae can return, and things are okay. But if the water stays too hot for too long, the bleached coral turns into dead coral because it can't survive that long without those algae. Here's just a picture of before and after at the same site. And this is from a film I highly recommend called Chasing Coral, which includes scientists and filmmakers that went to the Great Barrier Reef and actually got footage of the actual bleaching as the algae left the corals. So this is one of the most severe damaging thing. The Great Barrier Reef lost huge amounts of corals the past couple of years. And the corals that survived are now getting eaten. I'm not going to go into that. Okay, the next aspect of climate change is moving north. Lots of things. The water is getting a little warmer for them. They're moving north, and we have all sorts of things from barnacles to lobsters to codfish that we've seen the ranges moving up. They're staying into vicinity where the temperature range is what they're used to and what's best for them. So we are very unhappy that, for example, the lobsters are disappearing from Long Island Sound, but there's more and more lobsters in Maine and Canada because that's where it's better for them. Our waters in Long Island Sound are now getting a bit warm for them. The codfish similarly are moving north. Most things that can move are moving north. Another thing of pretty big concern is sea turtles. Now, sea turtles come on the beach and lay their eggs. And the top picture is a female sea turtle coming on land. Here's a rear view dropping eggs that look like about the size of ping pong balls into a nest. The nest is fairly deep. And with sea turtles, the temperature during development determines whether it will be male or female. They don't have the XY chromosome thing. They have a temperature-dependent sex determination. And within a nest, the eggs near the top are warmer, and the eggs near the bottom are cooler. And you have a balance. But as the beach sand is warmer because of climate change, you're getting more and more females produced. And there are new reports out of over 90% of eggs in nests for certain species of sea turtles are females. And as you keep warming, as we will, there may not be enough male turtles. Here, January 8th, 99% of a certain population of sea turtles were female. And then the scientist says many of the other species and populations my colleagues are studying are already showing 90% or more female populations. So here we may have a new way of making an animal extinct by getting rid of all the males. And the females, if you don't have any males, your population is going to, your species is going to go extinct. Another issue is dissolved oxygen. We talked a lot about dissolved oxygen when we were talking about excess nutrients and eutrophication. But here we have another phenomenon going on that also reduces oxygen. One aspect is that warmer water holds less oxygen. And also, when it's warmer on the surface, you increase stratification. What stratification means is the difference in temperature between the water on the top and the water on the bottom. If you've been swimming and you dive down, you notice it gets colder as you dive further down. The greater the difference between the water on the top and the water on the bottom, the greater the stratification, and that means less ability of oxygen to move down or for deeper water to move up. It's more difficult to do that when there's a bigger temperature change. So the blue on this globe represent areas where there is less oxygen than there used to be. And the red is areas where there's more. So you see a prevalence of the blue here. And so it's not just the oxygen problems near the coasts, which we know about eutrophication and nutrients. We're also seeing reduced oxygen in the open ocean because of climate change. And this is looking at hypoxic zones, and you see the red is the coastal problems due to a combination of eutrophication, that is the nutrient problem we talked about at the beginning, and the climate change. And then the blue is the oceanic reduction in oxygen. So oxygen is really important for animals, and even if it's not low enough to die from, when oxygen is low, lots of problems happen. Okay, sea level rise, another issue. Why does the sea level rise? There's really two reasons. One is that warmer water expands. That's a principle of physics. Something that's warmer expands, and it's true of water. The second reason is that ice sheets that were on land, glaciers and ice sheets, are melting. So we see more water coming into the ocean from what used to be ice on land. So those two reasons are causing sea level to rise, and the rate of sea level rise is increasing. We saw sea level rise going up slowly, and then it gradually is going up faster and faster and faster. And we have areas that are feeling the effects right now. For example, Miami Beach, parts of South Florida. It's underwater on sunny days there. And we have vulnerable areas along most of the East Coast, and we have vulnerable areas everywhere, really. We see there's a shot of Miami on a sunny day, right? And other low-lying areas. One tendency that people have is to build a seawall to protect their beaches, and that tends to make things worse. The beach in front of a seawall will erode much faster than if you didn't put a seawall there in the first place. And then another issue of concern that I think should be of concern to everybody, it's a major concern to me, is the intertidal salt marshes. Salt marshes are collections of plants that are uniquely adapted to living in or near salt water. The plants are adapted to be in the water part of the time and in the air part of the time. And these salt marshes protect us from some storms. They are wonderful habitats for all sorts of marine animals and birds and many other things. And they help, the marshes are absorbing excess flood water. They're providing many services to us. And they're really endangered because of sea level rise. Because what's a marsh to do in the face of sea level rise? It can either rise up with the sea level, which will require it to acquire more sediments to enable its surface to rise up. And some marshes do get enough sediment input, but some don't. The other alternative is for a marsh to move inland. And that's fine if it's bare, natural land inland from it. But if it's Route 27 immediately inward of the marsh, that's not going to help, or Route 25 up the North Fork or whatever. So many marshes are between a rock and a hard place, if it would. They can't rise up and they can't move in very far, in which case these are not going to persist. We're going to lose them. All right, so here's the issue. Can they move inland or not? Someone coined the term coastal squeeze to describe this problem of salt marshes. Interestingly, this plant that lots of people hate, Phragmites, a common reed, an invasive plant, does help the marsh elevate itself faster. It accumulates its litter more, so that in some ways Phragmites is doing a service, and perhaps people should rethink the general thing of restoring marshes by getting rid of it. Some attempts to help save marshes that are sinking under sea level rise is to increase their elevation by spraying sediment on them. There's a picture of this. Spray sediment from the creeks onto the marsh surface and bury the existing grass for a while and hope that you get, a few inches elevation from the new sediments, and then plant new plants or hope the old plants will come up. This is still fairly experimental, and it will take a marsh a few years to recover. But then the issue is, how many years after that will you have to do it all over again? Because the sea level doesn't stop rising. So is this something that, you make your marsh ugly for 3 years, you get maybe 3 good years out of it, and then you got to do it again. I don't know how long people will pay, to keep doing this. Last thing I want to talk about, ocean acidification. This is sort of the evil twin of climate change. It's not climate, but it's carbon dioxide. And this is showing as carbon dioxide level goes up in the air, the carbon dioxide level goes up in the water because the water is absorbing about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide. And as that happens, the pH goes down. pH is a measure of acidity. The lower the number, the more acidic it is. So basically what's happening is that the carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, it creates carbonic acid, and it increases the acidity. And the major problems caused by the increased acidity is difficulty in making shells, or perhaps eroding of shells that are already made, shells of calcium carbonate. And we've got corals and we have mollusks as the major animals of concern here. And as the ocean and the water gets more acidic, you can see here, this is the shell of a tiny snail. And you can see as it sits in water that's a little too acidic, the shell gradually erodes away. Coral skeletons as well are weakened, and the ocean is already 30% more acidic than it was before. And it's obviously going to continue by the end of the century will be 100 to 150% more acidic than it was then. One of the first problems was seen in cultured oyster larvae in Oregon in an aquaculture thing, which were not able to make their shells because the water was too acidic for them. And so the oyster farmers are fixing the issue by adjusting the acidity of the water coming in, which is very good for the oysters growing in the oyster farm, but doesn't do much good for the oysters and the other animals out in nature. So we've got failure of this, we've got upwelling, blah, 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 blah. I said all this already. Okay, that's what the baby larval oyster looks like. That's the stage that has to make a shell. This is through a microscope. This is tiny. And weaker shells, and this is all there. Okay, what can you do about climate change? All right, you can drive less, or drive a hybrid, or drive an electric, or better yet, take public transportation. Inflate your tires, fly less. Airplane flight uses up the equivalent of a year of driving. Eat less or no meat. I don't probably have to tell you about that. Recycle, reuse, refuse. Adjust your thermostat. Make it a little warmer in the summer. Make it a little colder in the winter. You can save a lot. Do your wash in cold water. Dry it on a clothesline. I wouldn't recommend that for the summertime, for the winter time, but if you have a yard with a clothesline, you'll save a lot of power using a clothesline. Go solar, put panels on your roof. Buy Energy Star refrigerator. Use LED light bulbs. So there's a lot of things that individuals can do to help reduce their carbon footprint. Overall summaries of the whole thing. What we see improving is persistent organic pollutants. These were banned, years ago. And oil pollution. I think these are ones that are going to be less to worry about. What's getting worse? Eutrophication, that's the nutrients and sewage. Invasive species, climate and ocean acidification, contaminants of emerging concern, and marine debris. And my take-home message is that individuals like us can do our part and reduce our carbon footprint and reduce our plastic use, but it's essential to have governmental action at all levels of government. And thank you. And I'm happy to take questions. Yes, sir. Oh, this is, all right.
It seems to me in your list of what we can do, you have skipped statistically the biggest thing
having
we can
children, right? Don't have so many children.
Well,
that's the biggest one.
No, the biggest one is stop using animal agriculture.
Well,
by every study.
Well, I said don't eat meat.
Okay. Thank you. I missed it.
Okay, that was on the list.
All right. Or dairy or eggs. It's all the worst environmental damage.
Okay.
Thank you.
But actually the biggest thing is don't have fewer children, but.
Thank you very much, Judith, for coming today. How about lime that we put on our lawns? Is that an effect on the water?
Lime, I don't know what, that's calcium carbonate?
Yeah, it affects the pH on your lawn.
So you're making it more basic.
Well, it affects the pH on your lawn.
I really don't know about that. I mean, the question I have is it seeping down into your groundwater? You have a well, is it gonna, I can't imagine that it would, eventually go down into the groundwater and eventually make its way to the ocean. Right. It might sort of help make the ocean a little less acidic, but it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the carbon dioxide coming in. But I
also,
off the top of my head, I can't think that that's going to be causing problems, but I really don't know.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
The fertilizer, let's say on Long Island, is there a restriction or is there any type of law that's coming up, do you see, in the near future?
I don't know about that either.
Okay.
I haven't heard, but I don't, maybe somebody knows. I don't know.
I'd like to recommend a documentary that was out recently, and we've had it out here on the North Fork, and I saw it in Huntington at the Cinema Arts, and it is called Plastic Oceans.
Yes, I've heard of it.
It's a great documentary to make us more aware of the pollution and the plastic damage that's caused to the animal sea world. And so I'd highly recommend it. You could probably get it online now.
I've heard good things about that.
Hi. Are there classes offered in a lot of universities now on oceanography, marine biology, and the problems that we're facing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a wonderful department at Stony Brook, for example. Stony Brook has an excellent marine science department. They have undergraduate and graduate PhDs, top-notch in the field, right here, Stony Brook.
Thank you for such a wonderful, generous session for us. Thank you.
Okay.